Perspective, presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Humanist Perspective. I'm Jim Dugan, your host for this evening, and our guest is Beth Deith, a longtime member of NOSHA and an active member of the board as well. Beth holds a PhD in psychology. She has taught at UNO, Tulane, and Loyola, but in recent years has moved on to more creative undertakings, and we want to talk about one of those today. Beth recently had an experience as a camp counselor at an organization known as Camp Quest. Camp Quest is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that organizes summer camp experiences for young people from families without religion. They describe themselves as providing an educational adventure shaped by fun, friends, and free thought, featuring science, natural wonder, and humanist values. Thank you for being with us, Beth.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
This sounds like a really interesting experience. I've heard of Camp Quest before. It's a big organization around the country, and they have a relatively new camp in Mississippi.
It is totally new. This is the first year of it, that they have a total of 16 sites across the U.S. now. And most of them just have one-week session sometime throughout the summer. They're sort of staggered all throughout the summer. Some of the bigger ones have 2 one-week sessions during the summer. But they largely operate as somewhat independent entities. And so, like, all of the staff is volunteers for all of them. And if you want to volunteer for one of these to be a counselor or other staff member, you apply to that particular camp. So to Camp Quest Southwest or Camp Quest, or there's a Northwest, there's a Southeast, and this is actually one of the first times that one of the camps is sort of expanding regionally. And this is an expansion from Camp Quest Southeast in is that South Carolina? I have my little map. Yeah, South Carolina. That they have now got a second Camp Quest Southeast site in Natchez Trace, Mississippi, and that was this one. It was the first year to have it here, so it was a smallish number of campers. I think there were about 25 younger campers, and then we had seven LTs, the leaders in training, which other camps might call counselors in training.
So maybe 25 or so young people for a week?
For a week. Yeah.
And this is pretty far out there. This is in the northern part of the state of Mississippi, near where it meets Alabama and Tennessee.
Yeah.
7 hours drive from here?
Yeah,
from
it was about 7 hours. Yeah, the closest town is Tupelo, Mississippi, and it's in a state park in Tishomingo State Park.
It's a nice place. It's pretty.
Well, it's beautiful. I mean, the woods and everything are just gorgeous, and the weather was so nice. It was a lot cooler than I thought it would be. It was definitely not so oppressive as here, and we had just great weather the whole time. We've had very little rain. We had like one day that was a little drizzly rainy, but amazingly we didn't really get rained out any day. But it being a state park, and a state park in Mississippi, that means they are dependent on tax dollars to maintain their facilities and such. And so it's not flush with cash as a facility, I think, and that was one of the things that we were looking at while we were there, and we want to teach the kids to be good stewards of the land and also the things that we share in common. That's part of our humanist values, and we kind of looked for ways that we might in future years give back to the park by helping to improve some of the facilities. Like there's this one place where there's a little stage outside and there's little benches, and some of the benches are a little wobbly and all. And having some of the older kids fix those up would be maybe a project we could work on in future years, to try and give back to the state park, because Mississippi doesn't necessarily devote a lot of money to things like that.
To the state park.
Yeah.
So now, since this organization is oriented towards free-thinking community to families without religion, how do the families select this? How do they just find it on the web? They
may find some of the kids who were there had gone to Camp Quest Southeast. Or maybe Camp Quest Smoky Mountains, and then this one was going to be closer for them. So some of them had been to a Camp Quest before, but a lot of them had not. I think, I first heard about Camp Quest on a podcast I know, and I think it was when Dogma Debate did a 24-hour podcast-a-thon that was to raise money for Camp Quest, that was their charity that year that I started to hear about it. So I think a lot of it probably is word of mouth, because for many of these families, they don't necessarily have a whole lot of non-believing friends where they live.
And that's an interesting thing about the organization. They very often focus on relatively out-of-the-way places rather than major cities for their centers.
Yeah, there's no Camp Quest in San Francisco. So people would ask that, why do you put it in Mississippi? It's like, well, that's where it's so needed. And one of the kids who was there, his dad, who said he'd been dying to have a Camp Quest there for ages, who lived in Tupelo, I believe. And he was a meteorologist and came and gave us this fantastic program on meteorology. Apparently something he does for schools. Like he had the jacket that had all the symbols, like used to be on the big weather maps, of the low pressure and the high pressure and all of this. And he sang weather songs and did weather things, making the tornado in a chamber. And we got to see a real live weather balloon, which is huge. I didn't know how huge those things were. And so, he's someone who had been there, just so excited to be able to talk to a group of campers who were very science-minded, free-thinking minded. And a field trip we did was to a Chickasaw Nation Preserve. One thing we did talk a lot about, was kind of a theme, was about telling stories. And because of where we were, focused a little bit on the history of the Native American peoples who had been there. And when we went to this Chickasaw Indian Preserve, which was just great, that was a fantastic field trip. And it's on the site of a former Chickasaw village that I think it's maybe about 10, 12 years ago that the Chickasaw Nation managed to buy it back and start building it up. And one of the people who helped take us around there was like, I looked up what you guys are about when Amy, one of the people running this, asked about bringing the kids here, and you're so amazing. And my wife and I are the only ones we know who don't believe in God around here. You get that a lot, like, me too.
You wonder about that sometimes, that there's people together in a small community who all think they're the only non-believer in the community, and they don't really even know about each other until there's somebody that's visible enough for them to out themselves to, in a sense. And
I think that's something else that Camp Quest does, is it connects these families, because now there's a Facebook group that's the families page for Camp Quest Natchez Trace, and the families are still talking on that right now. I mean, they continue to, their kids form some relationships, and then they are forming relationships online and connecting that way as well. So it helps the families find each other, as well as helping the kids find that there are other people like them. One of the signature programs that Camp Quest does is something called Socrates Cafe, where the kids get to talk about deep subjects of their choosing. You may make some suggestions, but they'll choose some of the important things they want to talk about, like what is knowledge? What does it mean to know something? What happens after we die? And people often think that kids don't think about those kinds of things, but they very definitely do think about those kinds of things. And when I was involved, there was one of those that I was sitting in on that had some somewhat younger kids, so we couldn't get into some of the really, really deep stuff. But they got into how you manage being a non-believer around your friends. And for many of them, they had to take a kind of, keep it on the down low. If their friends knew, they didn't really say anything about it. At best, it would be a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. And so this was, for many of them, just this freeing opportunity to be able to be themselves with everyone around them, being accepting of who they were. And on the last day at breakfast, I asked the girls I was sitting with, some of the campers, so what was the best part? And first they said each other, because they made some really great friendships there. And then one of them said, not having to deal with religion for a week. And they were like, yes, oh, it's so wonderful not to be Jesus staffed for a whole week. Yeah, apparently they're just, some of their friends at school are actually, they really do worry that they're going to burn in hell. And so they kind of keep at them. And they're like, I don't know what to do.
A little peace and quiet. So they get a little piece of quiet in the wilderness. The programming seems to emphasize life skills and a fair amount of educational science, philosophy, environmentalism, cultural awareness. What's the balance of it? It's not all going to be a classroom. It's not education.
No. I mean, we had a canoe trip. They did swimming 3 times. We had a field day where they did all sorts of games out at the there was a big open field area that they could play on, and so they were fun games too. They weren't kind of traditional sports, which was interesting because a lot of these kids are kind of nerdy kids, and so when we're going down the hill, there's some of them who are like, "What if I don't want to play the games? Can I sit out?" You know, they're thinking of their horrible phys ed experience or whatever. I was like, "Well, okay, but we'll see what they are," and they would be one that it was almost like a life-size version of skee ball, where everyone runs up and tries to toss the ball into the different area on your team, and then they add them all up, all the points. And they were things that you didn't have to have a lot of background or skill, and actually everyone got into those. You know, even the ones who had said, "I'm going to bring some paper so I can draw over here." It's like, "Oh no, this is fun. I'll do it." You know, so we definitely made sure they ran around and got some energy out. They tie-dyed. They really liked the tie-dyeing. That was something that. Did nature walks, did s'mores around the campfire.
I was going to say marshmallows in the campfire.
Of course, s'mores.
Ghost stories in the dark. Even non-believers can enjoy a good ghost story.
Did we do? I don't think.
No.
No, we did. I don't recall there being ghost stories. That could have been a thing. They had things where they were making stories for example, they had cabin skits that they worked on throughout the week, and because. The theme of this week at Camp Quest Natchez Trace was about telling our story and telling stories and how stories are communicated and passed on, and also tying in with the Native American history of the area. There is a world religions component. There's sometimes where they'll give talks about other kinds of religions while they eat. And this one was about various Native American traditions of passing stories along through myths and legends, and that stories can serve the purpose of passing on history, passing on values. And then we got into talking about the Camp Quest values, and the different cabins chose one of the Camp Quest values to make a skit about, to make a legend about how this value would have originated and how you would use your little story to communicate this value on. And actually 3 of the 4 cabins ended up choosing community as their value. One of them chose personal responsibility. They're nice and different, so this is little girls. And they had things like, they made little legends about all the wolves hunting separately and not doing so well, and coming together and as a pack and learning the value of community. And so they made their own little myths and legends. And so it's not like there's no room for imagination or anything there. It's not like we're squashing that kind of thinking, but it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be your everyday worldview, that you live in like a magical space.
Well,
they can tell the difference.
Their own narratives, to choose which value or what aspect of life they want to focus on, and how they want to encode that and present that.
And they know it's a story. It's not really real. It's a story, and that's sort of how the way many of them think about the stories their friends tell them about God and Jesus, but their friends don't think those are stories. And so, I think this week, even though it's just a week, that it was really for some of them kind of transformative in that respect of getting to be with people who really do accept them as they are, because we had this little short survey that we had them do before they left, and one of the things that's asked was, did you learn anything about yourself at Camp Quest? And a couple of them, some of the younger kids, said something like, I learned that there are people who will accept you for who you are, and if people won't do that, they're not really your friends. And it was like, whoa. And I kind of wonder how, if they're going to go back to their lives with maybe a little more confidence in who they are. And, there's the idea that, are we atheist camp? Are we indoctrinating them into atheism or anything, which totally not. If there's a philosophy emphasized, it is a philosophy of humanism. But really just to have a space where it's okay to be you is enough for them to get more confidence in who they are. It's not that like we've made them who they are. We've just shown them that it's okay to be who you are and given them a little freedom for that.
So a lot of thought seems to have gone into the programming of this, and like we've said, this is a fairly large organization. They have a lot of experience behind it, so it comes with a handbook, I guess.
Yeah, well, this was my little orientation manual for Camp Quest Natchez Trace. That I was falling in love with them just from the manual, because they talk about their inclusive culture, their Camp Quest culture, and they make it a point to use non-heterosexist, trans-inclusive language in the manuals, and in their, they have about that you're respectful for all kinds of questions, all kinds of point of view. And so certainly a religious child would be welcome. They would, however, be questioned, probably respectfully. And questioning other people's points of view respectfully is one of the values and skills that we hope to teach. But just what it was saying about the culture of the organization won me over before I was even there. And it does come out of the history of Camp Quest. Where is it? It started in Ohio, I believe. Yeah, in 1996. So it's been 20 years now that they've been working on this. So it's definitely getting refined. Although I think each location has some of their own special things. A lot of the framework does come from pre-existing Camp Quest things. So
it's I guess it's very practical to be able to kind of roll that. I mean, they have all these ideas about what are you going to do with a camp, and a schedule for a week of planned activities adapted to local. What's available locally. There was definitely
some trial and error and learning curve for this being the first year on that. Like maybe we would have worked the canoe trip different, because when that we took the younger kids one trip and then the older kids went on another trip. And I was with the younger kids. And, if you're in a canoe with a 9-year-old, guess who does most of the work on that? It's like, oh, maybe we should have kind of mixed in some of the older kids and the younger kids, because the younger kids really aren't, a lot of them, all that helpful in the paddling, So there were some, live and learn things like that. So there is definitely some tweaking for each little space, but one of the people who was so instrumental in this Camp Quest is Amy Monsky, who is the director of Camp Quest Southeast, and she was took the role as a staff person at Natchez Trace, where we had a a new director, Megan, who is sort of like learning to be the director of this camp. But Amy, having had the experience at Camp Quest Southeast, and Megan had had experience as a staff member at Camp Quest Southeast. So they have done this before and could work from that in setting up the new camp. They weren't just total newbies of setting up another Camp Quest site, which is, I think, a benefit to this strategy they're thinking of now of having existing camps maybe expand like into a little satellite camp here and there, as opposed to just anyone sticking them anywhere.
And all this is being guided by volunteers,
Yeah,
right?
totally
there's
volunteers.
no real paid staff.
No
in
paid
this.
staff. And I think maybe the executive director of Camp Quest overall, the national one, is maybe a paid position. Like there's one paid position, but all of the staff at the camp, for a lot of people, it's their 1 week vacation from their work, or one of their vacation weeks from their work, that they choose to come and do this.
Would you do it again?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I definitely want to do this one again. And I've also, it's gotten me really interested in some of the other Camp Quests. That we had, as I said, some people who had been at the Camp Quest Southeast before, and some who had been at Camp Quest Smoky Mountains, and would talk about their experiences at those camps, and maybe, I'm kind of interested in seeing what that one's like. I'm really interested in one aspect of Camp Quest Smoky Mountains, because one of the things that was not so great was the food. Yeah. Now, camp food is often, and I guess camp food in northern Mississippi, because we had to use the Tishomingo State Park food service there, and so it was kind of cheap and starchy and fried all the time. And I heard that the food at Camp Quest Southeast is. Most people said it was a little better, but not much. A couple people actually said it was worse, which I don't even understand how. And then we have these couple of staff members from Camp Quest Smoky Mountains going, well, we grow all our own food at Camp Quest Smoky Mountains, and we locally source everything, and then have this information for the kids on where all their food comes from and everything. And that they also have a thing there to try and minimize food waste, where they serve all the food family style on the tables. The kids can take or not take whatever they want, but they have to put the food that is left on their plates in a scraps bucket on the table, and they weigh the buckets to see which table has the least food waste, and it becomes like a game. And so yeah, it's like, that sounds kind of interesting. And also, they brought something else from Camp Quest, something that we could use from Camp Quest Smoky Mountains, that was called a night walk, which was interesting in that the kids were to be totally quiet, which they did with varying degrees of success. And they didn't have flashlights, so someone kind of in front and behind would have some low-level flashlights, and just to listen to the sounds of the forest at night. And at one point, there's a little point where you have one of the staff members go ahead, and they had scoped this out to be a nice flat stretch in the woods, maybe, 50, 100 feet. And then each kid individually can go by themselves in the dark to walk to this other part. And it sounds like nothing, to us, but a lot of them are kind of scared. And you can go with a buddy if you want to, but encourage them to go on themselves. And they're like, oh, and there's all the insect noises and all. But then afterwards, they're so amped up. Like, I did this thing, and I was brave, and I got to be in an environment by myself that I'm usually not allowed to. And weirdly, that was like a big independent step. And if you'd asked me, would walking 100 feet by yourself in the dark be a big step toward independence for kids, I would have been like, what? But they were like, no, we do this at Smoky Mountains, and it's really cool. And it was. It really was. For some of the kids, it was really conquering fears. So, yeah.
It worked out nicely. Do you get some of the same campers coming back year after year?
Probably. I mean, this is the first year for Natchez Trace. So certainly the other camps, they do seem to do that. And some of these were kids who had been multi-year at Camp Quest Southeast, especially the LTs, who were the teenagers. And the older teenagers were like junior staff, and they were just invaluable, this being a first year and not having a whole lot of extra staff. So the older teenagers were just invaluable in helping manage the kids. And the kids were just great. I mean, disciplinary issues were so few, and mostly handled very well, and you know, a couple of people had to have some talking tos, but then they kind of worked out. There was one camper who was kind of not so ready and did go home early, but mostly any issues were just, they were settled quickly and easily, and the kids were just awesome.
So just a bunch of kids having fun,
Yeah,
except
yeah.
maybe a little more science and
Yeah, I mean,
learning.
instead of a prayer at the meals, there's a moment of science. And the LTs did, at some of the meals, they did little talks on famous free thinkers. And so there's little bits of things throughout the day that kind of reinforce that scientific perspective as well.
I have that T-shirt that says, what
Yeah.
our schools need is a moment of science.
Yes, well, they do that, definitely do that at Camp Quest, which, and I see you've got the campquest.org address on there, that if anyone has thought about wanting to do, you know, something that will give back to the secular community, something with kids, I highly recommend it. You just go to campquest.org, and then you can go to the different locations and fill out an application to volunteer in whatever aspect you want to. You don't have to definitely be a hand-on counseling person.
They
You
do
can help
need-
with programming and things like that too. If
So
you're not
they
really
need
into
all
kids.
kinds of different
Yeah.
people to help out in a
Yeah.
lot of different ways.
Yeah, because it is entirely volunteer. And so there's just so many things. I can see that we're almost at the end of our show, and didn't even get to talk about so many of the things we did. Like at the dance that they do the last night, this is just too cool. 3 of the kids there, they with their parents and a couple other kids they have that were too young, they're like the Partridge Family. They're like a band. And they played, we had live music at our final party, and it was fantastic. You know, and it was just, there were a lot of things that were just like any other camp, you know, and they're just like any other kids. So,
And do you find it working with the kids? We have such a wide range of ages. You have to have a little bit of difference of programming for older.
that
and
was some of the
younger.
live and learn too, as to what things worked well for older kids but not younger, or vice versa. There was definitely some things that we can tweak for next year, but overall it went really, really well.
So it's nice to have a success like that in
Yeah.
your first try at volunteering for
Yeah.
something that's interesting and seems to be of use to you and to the children and gives back to the community, and it seems to be a very positive experience.
It was fantastic.
overall.
Positive for me, positive for the kids. I encourage anyone who has the time to do it, totally.
And next year, maybe you'll do it again?
Oh, totally. I will definitely do this one again, and I'm thinking maybe I might do one of the others again next
Another-
year too. Do
another Camp
session.
Quest.
Yeah, because there are different times throughout the summer, and I might see if I could work it to do 2 different ones. So Natchez Trace again for sure, and then maybe check out one of the other locations as well.
Which one would you pick?
I might try the Smoky Mountain
Smoky
one.
Mountain.
Smoky
With the
Mountains
better
are
food.
gorgeous, and they're just gorgeous place too. I love the Smoky Mountains. So
There's a lot to be said for just the beauty of the environment.
yeah, and this
being
one
out
was
in the woods.
gorgeous too. It was just beautiful.
Beth Deith, thank you so much for being with us this evening. It's been a very interesting discussion.